Well, I'd like to present you all with a question. Here is my question. Against the backdrop of the current economic crisis in Europe, combined with the debate, the ongoing debate of legislation tied to quota legislation for women on boards, plus all of the assertions that are now being made in the press that women represent the critical engine for global economic growth, does this represent the perfect storm? Are we finally at a point where considerations of women's legitimate leadership potential is recognized and interpreted in terms of corporate advancement? It's a complicated question. And I often think back to one of my first experiences, roughly 20 years ago, and that is, in some sense, my informal metric. And let me explain to you what happened. I was invited to join an evaluation committee in New York. I didn't know really what to expect. And I went to a rather elaborate ballroom for this meeting, and I opened the door, and there was a sea of white men. And suddenly this man came running up to me, and he said, "Oh, I'm the black, you must be the woman." He was right. So where does that leave us? And are we in fact making progress? Because certainly if you consider statistical evidence currently, it doesn't look particularly positive. So let me just examine some statistics in Europe. Currently, 3% of the top 50 companies in Europe are led by women. Women are 1.5 relative to 10 men on corporate boards. And globally, women MBAs are hired at a lower level, fewer promotions, less opportunity in terms of equitable compensation, even controlling for location, geography, function, industry, parental status, years of work before and after the MBA. So what is going on? Research seems to suggest that the challenge is a rather interesting one, and that is the perpetuation of gender-based stereotypes and unconscious bias. So what does that mean? And I remember once speaking to a dual-career couple, and they gave me the perfect example that I think manifests why this is so challenging. This particular couple consists of an individual. He is an economist, a law professor, published author. She is a pediatric surgeon and a hospital administrator. And they have a young son, and they have a reasonably good working arrangement whereby she typically drops off their son in the morning, and her partner picks up the son in the afternoon. And this particular day, this was not going to work because she had a very early surgery scheduled that morning. So he took the son to the Kinderkrippe, and just as he was handing the son over, the son threw up all over him. So he was covered with vomit. Quickly grabbed a towel, wiped it off, went running to the classroom, and his student said, "There's something going on with the jacket." And he said, yes, I apologize. I had to drop off my son. Oh, he was not even able to finish his comment. The students, oh my word, tenured professor, author, juggling all of this, and you take your son. And he thought this was fantastic. So when he went home, he shared with his wife. Here's the feedback. She said, "Stop right there. Let me tell you the other version of this story. I come to the hospital with vomit on my jacket. Here's what is not said. Oh, I don't know that she can multitask. She can't handle the stress. She wasn't able to change her jacket." So same behavior, different interpretations. So we did a very interesting study in 2006 where we took 953 managers across Europe. And we said, we have a very interesting question to ask you. We have identified the 14 key leadership attributes, and we would like to find out from you. Do you more typically associate this attribute with a man or a woman? So for example, team building, influencing upwards, problem solving. What was remarkable was almost without exception, all of the attributes that were deemed to be taking charge behaviors, men by virtue of simply being men were perceived to be more competent at that behavior. And women, simply by virtue of being women, were perceived to be more competent at taking care. Now, what does that mean? It does not mean that it is good or bad to take charge or take care. It simply means that irrespective of assessments of performance, even before someone has performed, there is an inclination to believe that you will see this attribute in someone. So clearly, there are default perceptions. We think the word leader, we think man, we think the word diversity, we think women. And there's also a very real danger that what we underestimate, we underutilize. And the third challenge is that we are gauging potential around performance, leadership, ambition, based on physically apparent differences alone. And let me share an example that I think challenges this. A company has a number of different networks where they're trying to really identify how to build an inclusive work environment. And this particular company had a women's network, had an LGBT network, had a people of color network, and they had a commuter network. The commuter network was for employees who traveled in excess of 1.5 hours to get to work. So this particular day, they were celebrating all of the networks, and the vice chairman came and opened the door to that network, the commuters network. And in that room were 8 men and 1 woman. And he turned to the woman and said, "Why are you here? Why aren't you in the women's network?" And she said, "Because my issue is my commute. My issue is not my gender." And he suddenly realized that he had made the very mistake that he had hoped these networks would address, which was the inclination to come to very precipitous assessments of talent, interests, commitments, and so forth based on physically apparent differences. So what do we do about this? What are the solutions? I think the solutions are fundamentally being aware of fundamental challenges tied to these issues. 1, mindsets matter. Perceptions, stereotypes, and so forth dictate what we tend to look for and what we expect to find. The other interesting challenge, and research confirms this, ironically enough, and this is very surprising, there are actually more differences among women and among men than between men and women. And yet we tend to think that women are a monolithic group and men are a monolithic group, and it's simply not the case. And I think, too, that in this day and age, when we want to really celebrate the potential and the opportunities for talent, we have to be very, very careful not to be predisposed to expect to see talent in a certain form. So what is a very practical intervention that has great potential? I often call it the power of discernment, the ability to notice difference. And I had a very interesting personal experience a couple of years ago that absolutely confirmed that I was suffering from a total lack of discernment this particular day. I was working in Japan, and I was driving a car that had no side view mirror and no rear view mirror. And I was driving with a Japanese colleague, so I was completely dependent on this colleague to help me navigate. And we were driving along, accessing a highway, and I said, "Yamato-san, is there a car coming?" And he said, "No." So of course I proceed to accelerate. He said, "It's a large truck." And we were within about 4 inches of a close encounter with a stone wall. And I just thought, oh my word, but he was absolutely right. And I think this is the message that I wish to leave with you. We have to get to a point where we can discern difference, where we can celebrate and develop workplaces that actually leverage these differences, not that we expect confirmation and compilation of stereotypes that frankly are getting in the way of accurate assessments and advancement of talent. And I believe we are on the cusp of a whole new, brave new workplace where the possibilities of working virtually, where people's gender is not the relevant determinant of the capacity to lend contributions that will certainly contribute to the economic and social well-being of our society. Thank you very much.